Welcome back to Address the Harm podcast. I'm Leah Brown, FRSA, your host, and this is the season roundup. Now, I must confess, I've really enjoyed recording all 6 episodes. We've had fantastic guests across the board, and I hope that Address the Harm has done both the guests and their stories justice. For those who are new to this community, Address the Harm is a cross-party, survivor-led campaign for accountability, fighting to end the system where Britain's publicly funded institutions investigate themselves when they cause harm. Delta poll research shows that 62% of Britons want survivors involved in institutional responses. So, we're campaigning for an independent, survivor-led office to oversee responses to scandals that include a commitment to prevention, a national restorative framework that requires leaders to acknowledge harm, apologise, own the damage, and make amends. The campaign was born from a white paper that I, together with some other collaborators, wrote entitled From Harm to Healing, Rebuilding Trust in Britain's Publicly Funded Institutions. The paper highlighted the importance of positioning survivors as experts, as blueprints for prevention, not as victims seeking validation or being opportunistic. Now, let's go back a few weeks to the landmark progress achieved not only by fair hearing, but also by right to equality since recording. The presumption of parental involvement was introduced in 2014 after pressure from fathers' rights groups, against the advice of the Justice Committee. It entrenched a pro-contact culture that prioritised parental rights over children's safety. Having seen firsthand how harmful this was for survivors, Dr. Charlotte Proudman founded Right to Equality, working alongside Dr. Adrian Barnett to challenge the presumption and reform family law. Together, they launched the campaign and parliamentary report with ambassadors and then MP Kate Kniveton, who herself had experienced the family courts firsthand. After years of advocacy and evidence, the government has now acted. Now, in episode 2, I explained that fair hearing also worked to secure an additional amendment in the same bill to restrict parental responsibility for those convicted of offending against any child. Specifically, serious sex offenders who have abused their own child now automatically lose that parental responsibility and therefore access to the family courts. In the same week, in October 2025, the government announced its intention to repeal the presumption of contact recital in the Children's Act in recognition of concerns about contact being ordered even in cases of serious domestic abuse, replacing that assumption with safety and ideology with evidence. This, of course, is a victory for children, for survivors, but also justice. Of course, there is still more work to be done. Right to Equality continues its commitment to reform by calling for the government to go further in the family courts, including prohibiting the use of parental alienation and similar pseudo-scientific terms, legislating against unregulated psychological experts, preventing children from being removed from their primary carers to enforce contact, reviewing past cases where children were taken from protective parents due to alleged alienation, and ensuring that all family court professionals, including judges, receive ongoing specialist training on domestic and sexual abuse. But then we moved into a fantastic episode with Izzy Vine, who is the founder of Speak Up Now UK. We're working with Izzy to launch a national initiative in the name of Address the Harm, amplifying the voices of people harmed by public institutions, using storytelling, research, and public education to expose systemic failures and strengthen community understanding of institutional accountability. Through media and survivor-led dialogue, we aim to shift public conversations about institutional harm and the structural cultures that enable it. We are really proud of Izzy for her campaigning to amplify underrepresented and marginalised voices within the public and emergency services, and we would ask that you support her crowdfund to help her rebuild her life at www.izzyvine.com/speakupnowuk. Such was true for Helen Newick, who bravely shared her story with me in episode 4. She has since reflected on her interview, explaining that without it, she would not have had a voice in the right space to be able to expose the covert, corrupt, cover-up culture in our publicly funded institutions, which she unfortunately experienced firsthand as someone who survived child abuse, and noted that her experiences sadly appear to be commonplace across the public sector and in any manner of circumstance. It was around this time the challenges surrounding Baroness Valerie Amos's review into England's maternity scandals came to light, following numerous serious incidents, including the Ockenden review into catastrophic failures at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust, which found over 200 baby deaths, and issues at East Kent. Families remain concerned about the investigation's scope, with initial reports from her interim findings in December 2025 highlighting much worse than anticipated conditions, poor care, and dirty wards, leading to calls for urgent action on staffing. Now, Baroness Amos has noted that while she did not have the powers afforded by a statutory public inquiry, she was seeking to identify systemic changes that could improve the quality of care in hospital trusts across the country. The BBC highlighted that the final report from Baroness Amos will be published in the spring, but the interim report, her reflections and initial impressions 3 months into the inquiry, highlight how ingrained poor care actually is. Between episodes, though, we were contacted by a survivor with Freedom of Information responses relating to the infected blood scandal that exposed the exact patterns we're fighting to end on Address the Harm. One police force has claimed to hold no information relating to infected blood cases, yet Home Office Freedom of Information responses clearly document their direct involvement. This isn't incompetence, it's institutional memory loss designed to avoid accountability. This particular survivor has shared their evidence with peers, a combined authority mayor, and their local MP, asking for pressure to be put on the Home Secretary to investigate systemic policing failures involving the PCC, the IOPC, and HMICFRS. But traction is hard to come by, and this survivor is racing against time as the government finalises the compensation framework for infected blood victims. I want to share their words with you that capture why our campaign exists. This situation raises serious concerns about the continued desire to avoid accountability, the persistent lack of transparency and honesty with victims and the public, and clear systemic failures across multiple authorities. It highlights, yet again, why the introduction of a statutory duty of candour and a full Hillsborough law is absolutely vital. When institutions pass the buck, deny the truth, and contradict each other about basic facts, survivors are left fighting ghosts whilst evidence disappears. I squeezed in a final episode of the season with Maggie Oliver, who firmly helped us centre responses to the government's challenges while navigating the Violence Against Women and Girls campaign. Maggie was crystal clear that institutional accountability requires survivor-led independent scrutiny with enforcement powers. As the government continues to face into the reality that inquiry after inquiry results in unimplemented recommendations, such as the 200 million ICSA inquiry, which has produced 20 recommendations still awaiting implementation. We needn't look further than the COVID-19 inquiry to see a similar picture on the cost of conducting the inquiry, as well as the challenges of implementing recommendations once it is complete. Furthermore, Maggie and I discuss the ways institutions actively block access so that survivors are unable to give testimony, usually being forced to rely on the media, as has been the case for those dissatisfied with the recent National Grooming Gangs inquiry composition. Since recording, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC, released a report on the 5th of December 2025, concluding that 12 officers involved in the Hillsborough disaster would face gross misconduct charges if they were still serving. The South Yorkshire Police Federation initially condemned the IOPC report, claiming officers were denied due process, but this, of course, sparked backlash from survivors and families and officials. So, on the 7th of December, the Police Federation CEO Mukund Krishna apologised for the insensitive statement and offered to meet affected families to discuss the report and its impact. Both Izzy Vine and Maggie Oliver were really clear in their episodes that unfortunately the independent IOPC is anything but independent. So the common denominator here, whistleblowers continue to face institutional destruction for exposing safeguarding failures. I'm sure you're asking, what next? Well, we'd like to record more episodes. We have post office survivors, Church of England abuse survivors, care leavers, families of maternity deaths, Grenfell survivors, and many others who would love to have their stories shared on the Address the Harm podcast. But to do this, we need you to support our campaign. Why not share this episode on social media? Why not follow us at Address the Harm? Every repost helps us reach new audiences, but more importantly, helps us reach survivors for whom it would make a huge difference to join our community. Whether you have £5 or £10 or £500, please consider supporting the Address the Harm campaign via our crowdfund. Donate on www.crowdfunder.co.uk/addresstheharm. You've been listening to the Address the Harm podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you again for caring. And thank you for helping us address the harm so survivors can heal. Copyright 2025, Leah Talks Limited, all rights reserved.